is our speaker here today, and who's the Director of Education at Speech and Language UK.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. And morning, everyone. Lovely to see you. I hope you can all hear me all right. I'll start sharing my screen in a minute. As I said, my name's Neil Maslin. I'm Director of Education for Speech and Language UK. Some of you might know it as ICANN. In our previous incarnation, we sort of did a relaunch, a rebrand a couple of years ago. And I'll start off in a minute just giving a very brief context about Speech and Language UK, and why I'm sort of speaking to you today and what some of the things that we're thinking about doing in this area. It's really interesting to listen to some of the speakers earlier, and I was sort of quite reassured that a lot of what I'm saying sort of supports and sort of is around the sort of same lines of what they're doing, and really thinking about how sort of special schools can really sort of play a part in what is, and just listening to them, such a complex arena we work in at the moment. So hopefully this will just give you a bit of a flavour of what we're doing. So let me start sharing my screen, and then we'll make a start. In 2 secs. Right, hopefully you can see all that. The purpose of this is just sort of thinking about where do special schools fit in the whole sort of inclusion agenda, and how can we use the expertise in special schools to support what is going on in mainstream schools. And that's not to say that all special schools have the answers. Clearly they don't. And also, I think there's an awful lot that special schools can learn from mainstream provisions as well. So obviously that's not the sort of purpose of this, but I don't want to sort of think it's sort of like just one-sided approach. Um, the presentation is mostly me speaking, but I'd be delighted to know I'm not going to do breakout groups or anything, but there will be a few sort of questions posed, which I'd love you to either sort of put things in the chat or just sort of, it's a small group, so you can sort of feel happy to sort of shout out as well if you want to as well. So let me start just by sort of doing a little bit about context about sort of Speech and Language UK. Our research says there's about 2 million children with speech and language challenges. I'm sure for many of you working in the sector, you'll see that all the time. A lot of it is undiagnosed, and a lot of schools struggle with how to support children with speech and language challenges. And we think roughly about 1 million of those are due to sort of environmental reasons, for sort of poverty or disadvantage, and then the rest make up some sort of more sort of neurodivergent issues where they maybe got some more lifelong challenges, and particularly a large group with developmental language disorder, which is a really quite unknown sort of speech and language challenge, and it's certainly not as high profile as some of the others, but a significant number of children are impacted by this. What really drives us in the charity is, the impact that speech and language challenges have on the children. I won't go through all of these, but you can clearly see there that those children who have those challenges, face quite some significant barriers, including a massively high percentage of children with mental health difficulties with speech and language challenges. And we know there's a really close link between sort of behaviour difficulties and speech and language, and often in our schools, or one of our schools in particular, which has secondary pupils, quite often they come with us as a primary need of sort of SEMH, but once we go through our assessment process, it's actually speech and language challenges or speech language need which comes out higher, but it's been sort of a lot of unmet needs there. So very quickly, what do we do? Again, some of this might be familiar with you, but we have a range of programs, one of which I'm going to talk briefly about later, which is a new one for us, which has come out of one of our special schools. So we have a range of programs, Early Talk Boost, Key Stage 1 Talk Boost. We do a Talk for Work as well. We also provide a range of training for schools, early years, nursery staff. As well as that, we also give advice for families. We have lots of information on our website. We have an advice line where parents can book a half an hour slot with a speech and language therapist, and we also have a progress checker which educators and parents can sort of type in some sort of areas their child might be struggling with, and we can give some sort of suggestions and things like that as well. a big part of our work at the moment is sort of pushing for policy change. Obviously, we heard an awful lot just in the last sessions about everything that's going on, and we're sort of trying to work closely with government as much as possible. And Claire, who you met in that first session, she's actually visiting one of our schools next Friday as well, which we're really excited about. So we're sort of doing a lot of work in that space as well. And then finally, which is the area which I sort of have main responsibility for, is we run two special schools. I'll tell you a bit more about those in a minute. And one of the things we're really trying to do at the moment is a lot of our sort of training and programs has comes through our national teams, not directly through the schools. But there's a lot of expertise in our schools which we want to share and disseminate more widely. So that's sort of a really big part of my work at the moment about what we can do, and that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about as well. And finally, just on the charity part, I think one of the things we sort of do very well, two things. We really focus on how can we make sort of quite complex speech and language type approaches more accessible to sort of mainstream schools, and we sort of support children who might just need just that short 6-week intervention, all the way to children who've got the most complex and lifelong difficulties as well. So very quickly, just put a bit of context. I say we've got two schools. We've got Meath, which is in Surrey, which is for about 75 children, and as their primary need will be speech and language, or sort of communication. And then we've also got Dawn House, which is an all-through school of about 120 pupils, which is just outside Nottinghamshire. Both outstanding. Dawn House, I think we were probably the last one. Must have been one of the last inspections under the old framework, and we got outstanding in all areas as well. So I know Ofsted's not the be all and end all, but it does give a level of sort of credibility, and does give us a level of sort of external validation, I guess, for the work we're doing. So what I want us to talk about today a little bit is just thinking about how special schools can support the mainstream, how special schools can support the inclusion agenda, and to give us sort of a bit of sort of support for how that might work. And I use the term outreach. I'm not a big fan of the term outreach, but I think it's well understood, because I think outreach just is quite a narrow view of how special schools could support. But I think there's a lot more sort of information, a lot more than just the sort of going out to other schools. Then sort of focus on a little bit about how special schools could be sort of pillars of inclusion. And then finally, a little bit about what we're doing, and provide hopefully a bit of inspiration, a bit of thought as well. As I say, certainly not thinking these are all the answers. It's just a sort of some thoughts, some ideas, and I'd be really welcome to sort of have some of your ideas as well. See what's going on. Okay. So just to start off, I just want to sort of think about sort of setting the strategic context around this a little bit. Obviously, I don't need to tell you, we all know about the scale of the issue at the moment nationally, the increase in send, and there's no suggestion that this is going to sort of change anytime soon. Our evidence from our schools is that the children coming in, the complexity of those children is increasing. More of our pupils have multiple needs. They have more safeguarding issues. A lot of them have had quite significant time out of school as well, which also increases the complexity of those children as well. And I know, because previous to this role, I was working in mainstream primary and secondary. We know that the mainstream schools are seeing this as well, and are really struggling to support it. And that's really sort of what's driving us at Speech and Language UK to think about, actually, what can we do to support those mainstream schools who are limited in resources, have limited expertise in some of those really sort of like specific areas, and have limited resources as well. So I think special schools do have a really, really important part to play in this, and should be in working in partnership with local authorities and multi-academy trusts. And I think for me, one of the big issues that's a barrier to this is the system we work in schools is so fragmented. So there's lots of different trusts. There's different sizes of trusts. You get trusts that work across local authority borders. You've got different types of schools, from sort of studio schools, UTCs. You've got maintained schools, academies. So it's really, really difficult to sort of understand how the system's going. And then within special schools, obviously you've got the sort of state maintained. I should have mentioned earlier, our schools are sort of non-maintained independent schools. There's very few of those now. I think only 50 across the country. And then you've got the independent sort of sector as well. So there's lots of different sort of stakeholders, lots of different groups in the system as well. And I know there's lots of really, really good examples of special schools or special school trusts working in partnerships with different local authorities and MATs. But in my experience, in a lot of cases, that's often quite reactive to when there's a bit of a crisis, or it's often about who you might know in those trusts or schools or the local authority. And in only a few cases, I see sort of some really sort of strategic approaches to this, and I think that's what I really want to sort of talk about a little bit today, about how could we be a bit more strategic in our approach to doing this. I think there's also an element of special schools doing things in their schools which are so normal to them that they don't realise what they're doing is something a little bit different, or something that other mainstream schools could replicate. So I think there's also a sort of a piece of work that for special schools to sort of really think hard about what are they doing, how could they support these schools. And then finally, on the sort of sort of like setting the strategic context, we know that the send reforms are coming. We spoke about that earlier. And although we don't know that the specifics, I think it's fairly clear that there's going to be a real clear drive towards making sure that mainstream schools are more inclusive and are supporting some of those children that might have previously gone into a special school or resource base. So how do we support those mainstream schools in supporting some of those more complex children? Some of the challenges of that, as we know, there's a cost associated with that. There's a capacity of schools to sort of release staff or plan some of this work. As I said, we talked about the strategic oversight, who has the overview of this work in particular areas, and that's really challenging in that sort of fragmented space. I think there's an issue sometimes of perceptions as well. And we've come across this before when we've gone out to schools and sort of said, well, you can do that because you've got small class sizes, you've got more staffing, you've got more resources, etc. And then the final sort of thing, which I think is a bit of a challenge, is that sort of moral imperative. We like to think that, our sort of whole sort of charitable objectives as a charity is to sort of increase our reach and see how we can support as many children, as many families, as many schools as possible. And I think we can do that because we're non-profit making. We use our resources to do that as much as possible. That's not always the same case for every single school. And then the final sort of challenge in this area I see is sort of some of the geographical barriers. So obviously special schools generally only support some of those schools within their sort of local geographical area, just because of the sheer sort of practicalities of it. So again, something I'll be talking a little bit about later, about some possible sort of solutions to that as well. So why do we want to do it? So following on from that, I sort of come up with sort of four main reasons about why we might want to sort of develop a more strategic approach to sort of special schools supporting mainstream. I think obviously ultimately we want to improve outcomes for children, whether that be academic or sort of other sort of more moral, social outcomes, but also sort of prepare for adulthood, getting them prepared for the next stage of education and employment, what it might be. And I think this leads to then a more sort of cohesive system, and obviously hopefully will reduce potential exclusions and more costly placements. We want mainstream schools to be upskilled and staff are in there, and there's a lot of discussion about that in the previous sessions about how how do we ensure that school staff and school professionals, or or anyone in schools gets the training they need to really meet those needs, and as I said, more complex needs that are happening in our schools. Also, there was talk about being a bit more proactive and getting in early. And again, we all know this, don't we? That the earlier you intervene, the quicker you get into to support these children, the better it comes in long-term outcomes. And then finally, we want it to be cost effective. We want to sort of make sure we're using that sort of local expertise where we can, and reduce some sort of more expensive on sort of reliance on sort of external providers. So just a quick thing, if you feel happy, put it in the chat. Just got a couple of questions there. So first of all, are there any more strategic reasons? Are there any other sort of things that we could reasons why we should be using special schools? I've listed the four I put up there as the main ones, just as a sort of guide. But if you've got any other sort of thoughts about what other reasons should we be using or utilising sort of the expertise in special schools, so feel free to put it in the chat if you've got any sort of other ideas or you disagree with any of those four reasons. Again, feel free to sort of call out. There's only 6 of us, so it's quite a small group. So, and then if you can't find any of those, oh, Sarah.
Sorry, I just decided it was probably easier to say it than
Yeah,
try and write it in the
absolutely,
chat.
definitely.
But I think for me, it's having a more of a cohesive offer so that children it can be more fluid in terms of the support they can get. So I know sometimes we have children who end up in a special school, but that doesn't mean that's their long-term provision, and actually that we can be confident in saying actually children can move between mainstream and special, where the support could be the same, similar. We use the strategies from one environment and use them in another. So I think that just more fluidity of the system rather than a them and us, you're either mainstream or you're special, I think would help.
I completely agree, and we've tried to develop that a little bit by sort of like where we think we've got a child who probably can go into mainstream provision, but we found there's some actual quite barriers, and I think one of the barriers is often parents, because sometimes they fought so hard to get their child in that special school provision, and then when we start having that conversation sort of leading up to those transitional annual reviews, they get very, very twitchy and very sort of
Very
like
difficult.
but I absolutely agree, and I think that's maybe a cultural thing that needs to change a little bit, that actually it isn't a sort of once you're in there, that's it, you're in there for the next 12 years. So no, I agree. Thank you, Sarah. That's really
I think
helpful.
if we can work together more, I think that will change that culture of it. But yeah, I just worry that for some of our children, especially our younger ones, and we're looking at our N2s at the moment that have got specialists on their EHCPs, and the long, that's a destination for some of them, that then they'll be in forever. They'll be in special school provision, and that will be completely right for some of our children, but it won't be right for all of them. So I think for me it is about having everything a little bit more joined up with one system, and children can be fluid within that system.
And I think just on that, I think it sort of goes both ways, doesn't it? So when there's a child that is potentially looking at a specialist school placement, are the special schools then working with the mainstream schools to sort of see actually is that the right placement, and can they put support in that school to make sure that to not put a placement, and vice versa, when they're ready for that transition back into a mainstream, there needs to be a transition plan, a really clear transition plan to do that. So I would really welcome that, and I think that is a really important thing. So thank you.
I think sorry, I'm just going to go on while I've got the
please do.
I think for some as well, because we've not got enough special school places, we just haven't. There will be some children who will be speaking to parents and saying, actually, they're going to be placed in a mainstream, and parents automatically think then that they're in the wrong provision. And some of our mainstreams start with the mental attitude of, well, then that they're a special school child and they're in the wrong provision. And actually we need, it's another way of saying, actually, if we can get the support from specials into our mainstream, the support and the strategies can be very, very similar, just in a different setting. And actually, it's something to be scared of or worried of if your child has got a mainstream place but has specialist on the plan.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. That's great. Where are you based, Sarah?
So I'm Cheshire East.
Cheshire, lovely. Thank you. Lucy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, just the reality, there are not the special school places, there are not enough. So it's, it is needed, isn't it? From that perspective. But also I was thinking a bit about parental and sort of student choice. And I remember being involved in a tribunal with a family who really, really didn't want a special school place for their child. They felt very strongly about that, but the other schools were saying, we can't meet need. And so just being able to say, well, yes, it can be a mainstream setting, and with this additional support, your child will, be able to cope and thrive, I think is really, really nice for some families.
Yeah, and there's some schools that would do that really well, isn't it? And I think again, it was mentioned earlier about how do we get that consistent practice so every school is able to sort of offer that thing, and that's the challenge, I think, isn't it? Thank you, Pippa.
Sorry, it's always difficult coming off mute. Yeah, I just wrote down exactly what Lucy had said around that parental choice and the young person choice for mainstream. I think far too often it's either mainstream or a specialist setting, and we do need to consider that some children with that parent choice, that we do need to our mainstream schools do need to be able to meet the needs of some of those more complex children in terms of speech language communication needs, mainstream with autism. The other thing that I want to sort of flag and raise is that there is also often within local authorities, specialist teams, specialist advisory teachers, speech and language therapists and OTs employed by local authorities who are also able to work to be able to support that inclusive practice within mainstream schools. And for me, it's about how specialist settings join up and are aligned with those local authority advisory teams to ensure that we're saying the same message, because I have had experiences where the local authority teams are trying to support inclusive practice in the mainstream schools because that's more sustainable and offers, keeps children within their local community schools. And then specialist settings have come to join that sort of engagement and have made a recommendation that actually the child's needs can't be being met in a mainstream school and should be being met in a specialist setting. So I really do need to think that we need to all be on the same page in terms of what the legislation says, what the parent and the young person want for their child in terms of the educational setting.
Thank you. It's really interesting. I'll touch on a little bit in a minute about that sort of how do we get therapists working with schools more cohesively, because I think that there is a challenge in that, isn't there? But it's interesting you say about that other specialist provisions coming in and sort of saying we can't meet need, and that rings alarm bells in my mind a little bit about why they might be saying that, but that's maybe not a conversation for today. But no, thank you, Joanna.
Well, we're up nearly afternoon.
Yes, almost.
I've just realised you're the first person I've spoken to today, so I haven't got my background on,
lovely.
So I do apologise. I'll just pop
Likewise, I think I haven't spoken to many people today. It's funny working from home like that, isn't it? So yeah,
it is. So apologies. I was in my trackies today, as I wouldn't normally be. That's what happens when you work from home. I'm from Hampshire County Council and I'm a commissioner, but I'm also an ex-teacher and worked in primary, secondary, special educational needs. And sort of like hearing everything that's gone on today, it's made me think we've got two areas here. We've got children already existing in education, or some not in education, where we're trying to make things better for them and implement certain strategies and interventions with all the different therapies. And then we've got young people that are coming into the education setting from nursery. And I do really feel it's important that all schools, mainstream, special schools, non-maintained schools, and independent schools should have, and part of it, like a legal obligation to have therapists in those schools, because early intervention is going to help us going forward. We do have children from various areas. Some of their needs are going to be neurological, some of them are going to be environmental factors. And I just think if you've got a class of 30 in a mainstream school in primary, it's not always difficult to be pulling out each individual young person's needs. And I always found is when it was secondary that things started to really explode, which is obviously hormones, etc., that come into play there. And I just think if every child had access to how a teacher delivers their class through using techniques through OT and SALT, it would make a big difference, regardless of whether they had SEND or not. It would assist every child and give them the tools that they need to help further on in life. I don't know if other people feel the same way about that.
I think there's a lot of sort of logistical challenges to that, just because of
Mhm.
the workforce isn't there. But I would absolutely agree that any child would benefit from OT, speech and language therapist input, or not, maybe not directly, but the teacher understanding some of the techniques and things that an OT or a speech language
Yeah,
therapist might do. And I think that's the challenge. I'll pick up on this in a minute. Well, I can say it now, really, that one of the things that we really want to try and do is support therapists who work in mainstream schools to work with teachers and other professionals.
mhm,
And I think that it goes both ways. I think I
yeah,
remember as a teacher, I used to hate it when people used to come into my lessons like, get out, this is my domain. But actually, when you've got those other professionals coming in, they add so much value. And we say, and you're going to hate me for saying this, our school, Meath, which Joanna, I think we get about 4 or 5 children from
yeah.
Hampshire.
We've got a few with you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And our model is that we have a speech and language therapist in every single class,
yeah,
which is, we know, a massive luxury, but the impact it has in terms of how the lessons are taught, and the delivery. And I always say that our teachers are better teachers because of the work we do with speech and language, the therapist, and our therapists are better therapists because of working with teachers. And they co-produce curriculum, the lesson plans, the delivery, and it's a very integrated, collaborative approach. Now, that's very, very difficult to replicate in a mainstream school just because you don't get them embedded. But there's certain things that we could support schools and therapists with to make that better. But yeah, no, it's music to my ears. I think that's I think could be transformational if we get that right.
yeah. I mean, I don't know whether it's worth looking at seeing whether pilots can be put together between mainstream and special and sharing good
Mm,
practice.
mm,
Because I did find that a massive help as a teacher
mm,
myself. Obviously, I went into teaching at a later stage in life, but the younger generation that are coming through university now, I feel need to have an awful lot more send in their
mm.
training,
Yeah.
um, to
Mm,
assist them because, as we know, we're losing a lot more teachers due to the complexities and the stresses that are put
mm,
upon teachers nowadays. And I just
yeah.
think they're not prepared well enough to deal with the complexity. You're not just a teacher nowadays. We all know that you're more than
Yeah.
just a teacher. You've got to have that social worker hat on, your safeguarding hat, your mum, dad hat, sort of scenario. So
Mm,
many hats you have to wear as a
yeah.
teacher.
Mm,
And send, as we know, in Hampshire, we've got over 20,000 EHCPs in Hampshire. So,
yeah.
and we've got near 1,000 children not in education. And then we've got
Mm,
about, how many have we got? We've got about 18. What have we got? I don't know. I'm trying to think how many we've got in special, in special schools.
mm,
I think we've
yeah.
got
Thank you.
nearly 2,000 in special schools. I think we're coming up to that figure at the moment, just in, and that's not in our maintained special schools, that's in our
Yeah.
independent non-maintained specialist schools.
Right.
Um, so
Mm,
it is getting tough out there.
it is.
We all know that a lot more work needs to be done in upskilling our teachers. And I
Yeah.
think to do that, the only way you're going to upskill them is by having these therapists in all schools and for it to
Mm.
be mandatory.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joanna. Just conscious of time, I'll bring Holly and then we move on. Holly, you there?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly echo, I suppose, the point that we made earlier about well, the current difficulty and how much difference it would make if that was easier moving between different schools, because we hear from parents so often that I mean, we know that it can take years sometimes to do that, fight that change, especially if it's disagreed and you've got to go through that tribunal process and how long they're taking. And I think all the work that's been done to try and improve those things in mainstream schools, which obviously have lots of barriers in, you know, all the things that we talked about in that first session. But even when things generally have got better, that fear of if things go wrong, it could take another 2 years or something to get back into the right place. And I just think it's that example of things working a little bit, you know, of everything trying to be more joined up, not working in silo, of trying to solve this problem around inclusion in mainstream schools and then look at stuff around EHCPs separately, because it is so overlapping for a family. And I just, it's just going to kind of not undermine, but just makes it less important for those families, all of the stuff that is done, because you're still just going to have that fear and just think, oh, actually, I can't risk the kind of loss of time and well-being for your child if it's potentially going to take that long. So yeah, just all needs to be looked at together.
And you're right. And I think there's a lot of trauma for both parents and children of sort of placements that have broken down in mainstream sometimes, isn't there, which you've got to overcome. So thank you. Just conscious of time, so I'm going to whiz through a couple of slides and then sort of share with you what we're thinking about. These are just a few sort of ideas and thinking about what that might look like, and some of these we've talked about already. So obviously the more traditional outreach stuff, the sort of CPD, particularly on some of that really specialist type. So we've got a lot of assistive tech in our schools, which I know is we're beginning to see more and more of in mainstreams, but obviously there's very little expertise on how to get the best use of that. So I think there's a lot of sort of work to done on that. I think one of the things that I find interesting is that a lot of special schools spend a lot of time adapting their curriculum, and I think mainstream schools are a little bit sort of hesitant to do that. So again, I think there could be a lot of support in how do we adapt our curriculum to particular groups of children, and I think there will be really good examples of how that works in special schools, but it's just how do we get that knowledge out there. And then we talked a little bit about the sort of the therapist integration. How do we get mainstream schools using that specialist therapy use in the best possible way? So we would be in our schools very welcome for sort of therapists from anywhere to come in and observe some of the practice. Not to say we've got it 100% right, but it's just a different way of looking at things as well. So I'll go into that. So what is our vision at Speech and Language UK? So we've got a long sort of like 4 to 5 year plan of where we want to be, and I think this is like one of those big grand statements that we want to sort of try and do. But we want to be nationally recognised as the leaders in education and therapy of children with the most complex speech and language challenges. And to do that, we want to sort of drive innovation. We want to sort of work with the national teams to shape policy, but most importantly, we want to empower professionals across the sector with some more evidence-based practice. So we're doing quite a lot of sort of research. We're just working with City University at the moment about that collaborative practice and doing some research on how that works and see how that could be replicated. And we really want to sort of develop our sort of outreach approach. How we want to do that is, again, sort of really sort of try and redefine what we mean by outreach, and what we want to try and do is sort of see if we can create some more immersive experiences that bring some of the really sort of exceptional school practice to life. And how we're going to do that is look at sort of developing sort of fully operational training centres at Dornhouse and Meath. We want to look at what particular practices or resources can we digitize to maybe break down some of those geographical barriers. And I'm going to give you an example of one we've just launched recently. I said national conferences, we want to do some sort of quite high level academic research to give it that real sort of like evidence base. We also want to think about other sort of technology from other sectors that we can use. So someone talked to me the other day about how surgeons learn about different sort of practices, about different sort of operating procedures. Now, you don't get sort of 30 people all in an operating theatre. They have quite sort of specific technology where people can observe practice through sort of remote, through sort of digital sort of cameras and sound and things like that. So are there sort of other ways of doing this? And then probably the most sort of ambitious part of it is that we are looking, and Joanna, I don't know if you've ever been to Meath, but it's quite an old site, and we're going through a sort of 4 to 5 year plan of how we're going to redevelop the site and do some new builds. And we sort of think, how can we actually design our space and design the classrooms to allow for people to come and immerse themselves in some of the practice we do. Now that needs a lot more thought. There's obviously sort of consent issues, and we don't want sort of video cameras all over the school and things like that. But there are probably some really sort of ideas, and we're sort of working with different architects and different companies to try and get some really sort of innovative and exciting ideas for this. Which brings us on to my how we've done one sort of way of doing this by sort of using some of the expertise in the school, put it sort of in a digital resource, and create a resource that can sort of be used sort of nationwide, but also sort of like anywhere really, because it's all online. And this is our pre-phonics toolkit. Now you're all very familiar, I'm sure, with obviously every child having to sort of be taught phonics in mainstream schools, but we also know that there's always a group of children in every single school that really struggle with accessing phonics, and most schools don't really know what to do with those children, and quite often they tend to do more of the same in small groups, and it doesn't work, and I think they're often quite scared about sort of trying to deviate from their sort of the phonics program that their school or trust is trying to do. So we created this pre-phonics toolkit, which is based on phonological awareness. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with phonological awareness, but it's about how we manipulate and use sound. And it's, if you don't have a good phonological awareness, it's very difficult to access a phonics program. And the phonological awareness gives you that sort of building blocks of accessing phonics. So we have designed this digital resource. We did it through the University of Newcastle, and I said to give the children the sort of functional foundational skills to access the program. So we were only really able to do this because we received a grant from a charitable trust, but we really feel it really sort of complements the sort of drive at the moment to use that special school expertise and really support mainstream schools who may have little or no expertise in speech and language, and you know, some of the issues to stop us doing that would be sort of cost, time and infrastructure, but because we got this grant, we're able to do that. So it's all hosted on the Learning Centre, and as you can see how it's sort of accessible. So it's got different stages that we sort of work through there. We've got video clips to show what that practice looks like in school. So I would have loved everyone to sort of come in and see what it looks like, but practically that's quite challenging because it's like a 20-minute slot, and you know, again, it's a geographical reach. So we've designed a set of videos, a set of instructions of what you need to do. We've got sort of like really clear sort of frequently asked questions and sort of you know, take you step by step. It needs no training at all. You can literally pick it up and go, and there's some examples of sort of what that might look like in the instructions, and then sort of a tracking sheet as well. Now I've got a very quick video clip just as a sort of promote what we did as promotion, just to give you a bit of idea. So hopefully you can hear that. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear that? Yep. Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah.
The children that we need to be concerned about are those who are struggling, because children who struggle to learn phonological awareness when they're very little are always going to struggle, and they're always going to need
support. Did it stop for you?
Support.
The daily sessions are short, focused and fun. There's lots of
Sorry, I don't know why it keeps on stopping.
repetition, which the children find very reassuring. Children are incredibly motivated to move on to the next level. They listen to each other, so they're kind of learning from their peers as well. We find it such an enjoyable thing to do at the start of every day, and it gets children's brains turned on, ready for learning.
I've worked with several groups of children over the years, and to see the progress that they've made has been truly amazing. I've seen children grow in their confidence, and to see some of them have some real light bulb moments, to watch them learn how to really listen and tune in to the sounds of each word is really fantastic. This programme is prescriptive and accessible, which enables
Sorry, I don't know what.
staff with a range of experience to deliver phonological awareness sessions at each level with confidence.
So I'll stop sharing now because we're almost at the end. I sort of rushed through that last little bit, so my apologies for that. But so hopefully that just gives you a little bit of flavour of our sort of what I think is the sort of real strategic imperative about why we should do this and some of the challenges, but also some of the sort of what we're sort of thinking about doing. I will put my email in the chat quickly, so feel free if you've got any questions. Please don't hesitate to email me or any thoughts, or if you want to come and visit the schools, you're very welcome to as well. Any sort of immediate questions anyone's got before we finish? Great. Well, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure meeting you all. I hope you have a good rest of the day. I say happy to stay on a couple of minutes if anyone wants to any sort of final sort of thoughts or questions. But that's lovely. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Take care.
it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
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 Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Lovely. They
Okay.
chatted a lot more than I thought and took up a lot more time, didn't they? So, but yeah. So
They did.
yeah.
I
Yeah, so-
know. Okay.
Lovely.
Yeah,
Are
I
you in the
feel
next
like
one as well?
yes, I will be
Yeah.
in the next one.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that went well. Yeah, sorry if you felt a bit pressed for time at the end.
No, it's fine. It's fine. No, I'm glad they. I think you don't want to sort of like stop the conversation, do you? Because obviously they're quite
I know.
engaged. So it was great. So yeah. So brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, amazing. I'll see you in around 10 minutes.
Perfect. Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye. See
Bye.
you.